There we go, Matt. Look here, we've got a nice little shore crab here. So we've got a crab here, Matt, and crabs are the most advanced groups of crustaceans, and they've largely lost the tail that's typical of shrimps and prawns and rock lobsters. And the tail now doesn't perform a locomotory function at all. It's folded up under the thorax of the animal, and it's only used for reproduction. So you can actually tell the sex of the crab by looking at the abdomen. So this one has a narrow triangular abdomen, and that makes it a male, and then the female has a semicircular, much broader abdomen. The crabs mate with one another, and then the male inseminates the female with little penises, two little penises that he's got under his little triangular abdomen there, and then she lays her eggs and she carries the eggs on the abdominal appendages. So sometimes you'll pick up a crab, a female crab, under her abdomen there you'll see a whole lot of pink or brown eggs. And we talk about crabs being in berry, you may have heard that expression, when they're carrying the eggs. And then the eggs hatch out into little larvae which swim around, and interestingly, as larvae, when they develop, do actually have a tail. And then when they reach their last larval stage and molt into tiny baby crabs, then that tail is lost. So kind of evolution is reproducing itself, rather like when you have a frog, then the tadpole has a tail more like a fish, and then it develops into an amphibian. So with the crabs as well, the larvae looks more primitive crustaceans, and then when it molts into the adult, then it loses the tail. So crabs are actually a fairly tropical group. So on the KwaZulu-Natal coast you get lots of different species, but down here in the Cape you only get a few common species. And in fact the crab community on the seashore here in Cape Town is dominated just by two different species. So this little one here is called shore crab, and it's a very high intertidal species. So a lot of people don't see it actually because they don't bother to turn over the rocks very high in the intertidal because they kind of assume there's nothing there.
Yeah.
But we're right up next to the drift line here, and under each of these boulders at my feet here, there's several of these little shore crabs. And this is a male. He's got quite big claws and can actually give you a fairly significant nip. So you have to pick him up fairly carefully across the back here. You can't reach behind his back to nip you. So down here lower on the shore, the dominant crab is the Cape shore crab, which is a red striped, quite reasonably large animal that runs very quickly, and you usually see them moving around in rock pools or on the surfaces of the rocks, and then they use their quite small nippers to quite delicately pick out little invertebrates and little pieces of seaweed and eat them. So they're often quite busily, like they've got their chopsticks out and they're going tick, 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 munching away on little tiny things. Then they're omnivorous, they eat small invertebrates and also little bits of seaweed. This is the Cape rock crab. He's got very long legs and quite small nippers, square carapace, and he's got little ridges, little rows of knobbles along his claws and spiky legs. And aside from those two species, which probably make up like 90% of all the crabs you see, the only two really common ones that you come across are a little knobbly crab that's called the kelp crab, very cute. It's only probably the size of the end joint of your thumb, but the carapace is covered in little red knobs, and then it has big claws with black ends to the nippers. And you usually find those in places like kelp holdfasts or under boulders low on the shore. And then the other actually very interesting one is the sponge crab. And this is a really cute little crab, and I think I'm going to put this little guy down now before he nips me. The sponge crab holds his last pair of legs behind his back here and holds onto a piece of sponge or sometimes a piece of compound obsidian, and he hides underneath that. So that's his little umbrella, his little cloak. And if you see this little piece of sponge walking around on the rocks, you know that there's a crab underneath there, and if you turn it over, there's the little crab holding onto the sponge, and that's his mode of protection. So the sponge actually carries on growing while he's carrying it around. So as the crab gets bigger, so his sponge gets bigger, he doesn't necessarily have to ditch it and get a new one when he molts.
It's sort of like a hermit crab with a home that just keeps growing on his back.
Yeah, that's right. It's the same idea as a hermit crab to provide protection, but this guy's got an actual living cloak, and he can change colour, he can change his outfit in the morning, ditch that piece of sponge and find another one. So I think they actually kind of cut off the sponge from a living colony and then put it over on their backs. But those are the only ones that you'll really commonly find on the Cape shore. In KwaZulu-Natal, as I say, there are a lot more species, but again there's a really dominant crab called the Lightfoot crab, the Natal Lightfoot crab, and that's very much out in the open. So if you look at rocks where the waves are breaking, then you'll often see them running around on the rocks near the low water mark, right out in the open. And the waves like crash against them and they just cling on, and when the wave goes back they're still hanging on there, so they have an amazing grip. And then they just move around, often on these vertical rock faces, and you can see their little nippers going. They pick up little invertebrates and little bits of seaweed and eat them, but they're very pretty red and black coloured crabs with this amazing ability to hold on in the waves.
We quite often see crabs washed up on the shore. Are
they yes.
high mortality rates or something?
Yes, that's an important point to make, Matt, because when you see crabs washed up on the shore, that doesn't necessarily mean that they've died. In fact, most often what you're seeing is the moult, last week's clothing. So as the crab grows and needs to expand, then it has to shed its hard external suit of armour, its carapace, and it kind of reverses out of it. So it splits open between the carapace, the roof, and the abdomen at the back of the animal, and then it reverses out, which is quite an incredible procedure actually, because, for example, the claws have got to come out through the little wrist, which appears to be much, much narrower. So they've got to squeeze out through these narrow apertures, and then the animal emerges out of the back of its old shell, and it's all soft and squishy, and they have to go hide away somewhere while their carapace hardens. So they
can toughen up.
They inflate themselves up with water to a bigger size, to the next clothing size, and then they harden over a couple of days, and that old carapace gets washed up on the seashore. So at certain times of the year you'll see lots of what appears to be dead crabs, and I often get people asking me why this terrible crab mortality, but it's actually molting season for the crabs. So almost all of those crabs are actually happily back in the sea at a nice bigger size and with a nice shiny new suit. So next time you're on the seashore, look out for crabs. They're often not all that common, and they scuttle around. They're very mobile, and some of them can give you a pretty nasty nip if you do catch them, so it's actually better to just watch them. They're interesting for a number of reasons. They're the most advanced of all crustaceans. They're very intelligent, like octopuses, and in fact they have a comparable intelligence to the lower vertebrates. They're also very important in the ecosystem, both as predators themselves. So some of the ones with larger claws, for example, will crush mussels and clams and other mollusks and eat them, and they can be important control measures for things like mussels. And they're important as food themselves. So large predators like large fish, seals, and of course octopuses actually love crabs. And sometimes if you see a crab rushing out of the rock pool and scuttling away, often you'll see it's actually being chased out by an octopus. So they're octopus's favorite food. So look out for them next time you're on the shore.
It's frothing at the
And
mouth.
she's having a frothy.
Yeah.
Don't eat me, I'm only a little crab.
Is that like a defense mechanism?
It's a defense mechanism. And the other defense mechanism is to bite your finger very hard, which she also did just now. He's circulating water on his mouth parts there, and that's the way they breathe. They pump water round and round their gills, which are underneath the shell. And if they're out of water like this, they can just pump a little bit of water back and forth in and out of the gill chamber to get oxygen.
If you enjoyed watching Explore the Shore, please hit subscribe and follow our Instagram for more.